we're going to take a minute to recognize our sponsors.
Stratigraph has extensively worked the Gulf Coast, all of Texas, the Mid-Continent, and is now serving the Permian Basin from our offices in Odessa. Stratigraph offers a host of geologic services, from logging to steering to geochemistry. Stratigraph has logged over 14,000 wells worldwide, including 750 recent wells in the Permian Basin. Take advantage of Stratigraph's extensive experience, now combined with local service, serving operators large and small, including over 20 different companies in the Permian Basin. When it's time for your geological services, ask for a quote from a multifaceted company with over 57 years of experience. Stratigraph, accurate data, reliable solutions.
UTPB is getting ready for their third annual Geoscience Symposium. The symposium has had terrific success with professionals from the local oil and gas industry coming in to check out the students' research. The symposium this year will include UTPB President Dr. Woodley, Dr. John Rotson, Stanford graduate and president of the Basin Dynamics, as keynote speaker along with multiple students' oral and poster presentations. Mark your calendars, y'all. It's on April 25th.
Roberts Accounting, providing a low-pressure approach to personal and professional services. They have an excellent client retention rate and are extremely proud of their high-quality services that their firm provides. They strive to help make the final tax returns a foregone conclusion, rather than a pitfall of potential surprises and setbacks. They encourage their clients to stay in constant contact throughout the years to keep them informed of the changes and the events that will influence their tax situation. For more information, please call 818-884-2334 or visit robertsaccounting.com.
Mudrock Studio is located in the heart of the Permian Basin, Midland, Texas. It's a world-class recording studio. Contact Anthony Nieto at 432-557-1055.
The views, opinions, and experiences stated in this podcast do not represent the official views of Diamondback Energy, but are solely the personal views, opinions, and experiences of the speaker and the hosts.
3, 2, 1.
Let's go!
All right, I am the host of the Permian Basin Experience podcast, Troy Tittlemeyer. My co-host, none other than Matt the Skip Scipione.
We're back. First episode. Really excited about today. We have Dave Cannon, the VP of Geoscience at Diamondback, in the studio, or FANG, for those of you who are really into your stocks. But man, I'm excited about this one. I don't know about you, T. Roy.
Dude, this first show is going to be the foundation of our podcast. I really believe it, man. So let's get started. Sir, it's good to have you here. And just to jump into a quick introduction, I've known about you for like 5 years almost. I've known you for like a year and a half, 2 years, I would say. I mean, I've golfed with you. Like, your last name is perfectly said for your golf game. He is the Cannon. Driving golf balls 350 yards easy.
Par 4 to the green.
Yes.
All day.
And now, I mean, I showed up in 2014 with a random bachelor's degree in geology from California, banging on every door. I banged on Diamondbacks for weeks, along with everybody else's. Didn't get into Diamondback, obviously. I met Trey, so that's fine. However, now, what are we doing with like a young education, youth education program we're doing together? Like, you are obviously someone that stood out in the industry and locally, and I just gravitate to those folks, and I'm just so thankful for the friendship that we have, for sure, and for you to come on the show, man. I'm just so excited. I'm pumped that you got a good life, man. You got an awesome family. Like, you're inspiration, I think, to a lot of people, and maybe you don't realize that, but I will definitely say it. You really are, and so I'm excited for the show, man.
I'm tearing up over here, Troy.
Skips, what do you think?
I'm tearing up too, man. That was deep. That was good stuff.
You have anything for Cannon?
Man, not much for now, man. I think we're just going to hop right into it.
Yeah? You're excited about anything particular?
All that San Juan stuff. I'm always pumped with the Green River Basin. Can't really go wrong with those two. And then just, moving on and talking about the innovations that should be happening that aren't happening, and, how we're going to progress from there. So yeah, I'm pumped on it.
Send it over to P. P, you got anything interesting for the Cannon show?
No, man, I'm just excited to learn what he has to share with us.
Yeah.
Hopefully he gets to talk about some MTDs in the Permian, get his take on these mass movements.
Woo! So Perry's got his thesis done on the MTD in the Midland Basin, so he's got some arsenal.
Can definitely tell that was a pointed question.
Hey, throw up that website, P, and let's bring that up. And this is Fox Business reporting on the 9th of February, just a few days you pointed out before this. And it in my opinion, the article is basically saying there are some public companies in the basin that seem to have something very special. And there are some people that are going to win, and there are definitely some people in this basin, in this industry, that are going to lose when oil tanks. To go a little bit further in that is the infrastructure. It points out Apache spending so much money on the Alpine High infrastructure, and you guys talking about infrastructure, and some others that I've talked to that really focus on infrastructure. It's not only about the screaming wells and how cheap you can make this stuff, it's getting it to the refineries.
Well, it's perfect scenario. The cart should never lead the horse, right? So you always have to be able to deliver your product wherever you're at, but you have to do the sound assessment work, the sound appraisal work to understand if it's going to be worth that kind of investment. Midstream investment is capital intensive. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of literally kicking pipe into the ground. So you have to know what you have first before you have any idea if you want to go down that path. And, that's what we're doing at Diamondback. We're excited about all our asset areas, and we want to turn that cost center into a profit center by putting it into a business partner relationship like we have with Viper Minerals. So we're pretty excited about the future and what the future can hold. We believe in our assets, and we believe it will turn into profitability on the midstream side as well.
I believe that too.
Well, if you're a stockholder, we'll get on the rocket ship.
Hey, you got to bring oil out of this basin. I mean, that's the biggest issue I feel like every company is dealing with right now. I know that's something that, from a smaller operator all the way to the majors, right? It's how can you either fill the demand that this pipeline requires, or how can we actually get into this pipeline? I know that's something that we're all kind of struggling with right now from top to bottom.
Go ahead, Ken.
I was going to say, that's a lot of the smaller companies struggle with that just because they don't have a lot of scale sometimes. They need that scale of production, that scale of volumes to be able to bring to some of the larger partners you see in the basin building out midstream infrastructure. So they end up paying a pretty pricey dollar for that space within the pipeline, especially if they don't have, future volumes growth that a lot of these midstream companies can look at and kind of hang their hat on. Which is why companies like Diamondback, larger companies of scale, can provide not only lower cost structures from third-party midstream companies, but the fact that now Diamondback in particular has a large acreage position that we can exploit. Now we have the ability to take that on ourselves, right? And build out that infrastructure to be able to carry our own volumes to market. And maybe make some investments in some long-term or long-haul pipelines to be able to get to, preferential markets like Brent pricing. That's one of the biggest things that we did was enter into some strategic partnerships for pipelines to the coast, so we can influence our profitability for our shareholders to be able to see better pricing.
Yeah, I mean, what a model. To me, after I read that and kind of thought about it, it just makes sense, man. I mean, if you can fight those differentials, and now when oil tanks, because it's inevitable that it will, your bottom is different than others. Your bottom truly physically acts and responds different than others. So I think that's what that article was talking about, was that there are some people that don't have that, and when oil tanks, what are they going to do? That's a great position for Diamondback, in my opinion. I mean, it's just how the article read, and again, it was by Motley Fool, and it is what it is. I mean, it was content, right? Yeah,
right. And we're not going to be against content that's going to be out there. I mean, people will post things that they post, and usually it's of their own opinions, and sometimes they get picked up. But this one, it was picked up by, a national media outlet. But the story remains the same. Diamondback wants to be a legacy company. We're not here for the short term. We're not here for short-term profits. We think about the long term. We think about 5, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. I mean, that's the entire reason why we combined with Energen. Mm-hmm. Give us that runway. We had, go from a regional airport to international airport, right? Extend that runway a little bit so we can land some of those big planes.
It's like, it's already proven up, and now you have the running room to just keep going.
Right.
So
make it better.
And it provides not only our shareholders profitability for their investment into the future, but also provides our company, security, knowing that 30 years down the road, Diamondback's still going to be here. Our CEO, he always said during the downturn that we have to build a company that can be so resilient to any oil price that when the last light is turned off in Midland, Texas, it's turned off by a Diamondback employee, not by anyone else.
Ooh,
I like it. I like it. I love it.
that's awesome, though. I mean, not only from a CEO's perspective, right? Instead of just flipping this and trying to make, that bottom dollar work and, lining their own pockets, being like, hey, we're in this for the long haul. You guys don't need to worry about it when the prices drop $20, $30, right?
Just a little bit of historical context on Diamondback. One of the things that was really, I think, something that we should always tout and we always do when we talk to other people about the company. 2015, 2016 was just a disastrous period for our industry in short-term histories, in a short-term history sense, right? In terms of what prices were, $100 to $105 was the price band for 3 years. No one thought it was ever going to come down to $26 a barrel, but it happened within a year. And everyone was absolutely stunned that the demand and supply curve could flip so quickly. And that was the biggest stressor, I think, in our industry. I mean, you look at some of the other cities across the U.S. that are oil and gas focused, places like Tulsa and Denver and even up in Canada and Calgary, absolutely devastated. I mean, all those satellite offices were being closed, droves and droves of people were being laid off.
I was hearing a lot of stories about people killing themselves, man. I mean, to get it that real they were losing everything.
I know.
Aubrey McClendon, nobody wants to talk about it, but what'd that guy do? Who knows? I mean, that was devastating. And there was not just him, there were several stories of just absolutely devastating. It was truly a shock.
Yeah. I mean, for a lot of the more experienced folks in our industry, they said, well, this is just another one, right? I mean, this has been their career. Their career has been marked by price swings to the amount that us in our early careers haven't really seen. Mm-hmm. The depths of what we had in 15 and 16 is as deep as our ages has really been able to experience. The one that happened in 2008 through early 2009, that was such a short-lived crash that it was a kind of a blip on the screen, mm-hmm. right? I mean, you didn't really get a true sense of what a prolonged downturn could do to our industry. Yes, there was a slowdown in activity. Yes, there was some companies that were laying off, but it wasn't to the extreme that you saw in 15 and 16, where you had this tremendous halt in E&P, in spending in our E&P space, and then you had the subsequent workforce reductions across the industry as a whole. But one of the things that I really Diamondback prides itself on, is during that time, we were hiring people.
Wow.
Let's go.
Because we said, hey, a lot of these companies out here are cutting to the bone in terms of the staff that they have. They're getting rid of people who are extremely experienced, extremely talented at their job. And we said, this is an opportunity for us to grow our company in terms of personnel, in terms of talent.
Wow. I was living it.
We saw that as an opportunity set in front of us. Our leaders, the ones who created the company, they built a company that could withstand a downturn like this. And it was that base that allowed us to flourish and grow during a downturn that other companies couldn't.
The vision. The vision's incredible. It's a great place. It was a great place to be a part of before the downturn, great place to be a part of after, and it will always continue to be a great place going into the future. Perfect segue into really the next segment. We have, what is your expectation from this show, and what do you think this show can bring to our listeners and the industry? I think if this setting, this platform takes traction in the local industry, which I hope it does, I think what it can do is it will allow our viewpoints
to be spread across a wider bandwidth than what we currently have. I think one of the things that we struggle with as an industry is public relations. We have a service-oriented industry. And why I say it's a service-oriented industry is because we provide a commodity, to our continued growth as an economy, and not only within our country, but as the world. Because of that, we just have to put our nose down and do our work, because we don't have a lot of control of what outside voices can tell us to do or not do, because we have things that we have to get done in terms of our own internal metrics within a company, in terms of our metrics within an industry, but then our abilities to be able to provide that energy going forward for continued growth of our economies across the world, and continued prosperity of humans, if you will, within the world.
Wow.
So one of the things that, I think we have to do better is get our word out in any kind of media that we can, because there's headwinds with the media outlets as they stand today in terms of what we can bring to the conversation about energy, what we can bring to the conversation about where we should be in 50 years. There's a lot of people out there who say oil should be dead, and I struggle against that, because right now it provides a very inexpensive means of being able to provide energy across the world. And to say that you want a very inexpensive means of energy to be exhausted or to be extinguished is saying that you're going to now want human flourishing to stop.
Wow.
And I have an issue with that.
Yeah.
I have young children.
Well
I want
said.
them to be in a world that they can continue to grow, and in a world that they can continue to prosper.
Amen, brother.
So, because to me, just like a lot of people confuse what the American dream is about. Everyone thinks that the American dream is, well, I get a car, or I get a house, or I get $1 million or something like that,
yeah.
right? That's the American dream to them. No, the American dream is that you're afforded the opportunity to get those things if you work for it. But you have to have a base amount of material infrastructure and economic structure to be able to sit within that and prosper. And we're one of those key components to that structure.
100%.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues right now in oil and gas is everyone not only viewing the industry, but within the industry they keep everything so tight to their chest. You know what I mean? And we know we have these conversations at a luncheon or, some kind of talk, but being able to provide a platform where we can get these ideas out and get people maybe not necessarily changing their mindset, but at least thinking of a different narrative. You know what I mean?
100%.
We have a phrase in our company. It's called control the narrative. If you have control of the narrative, then you can set the tone of a conversation, right? Or you can set the tone of a business transaction. So I think what we need to do as an industry is start to control the narrative on who we are and what we provide.
Wow. And I think I can speak on the behalf of all three of us, as me, Perry, and Matt being on the show. We have a lot of goals involved in this show, but at the end of the day, if we could be honored in some point in the future with what you said, and we were able to provide and be that spark to our country to understand what we do when we exhaust ourselves mentally and physically for our jobs to get efficient energy out of the ground to supply the demand of energy from the people and around the world. I mean, that's it. I mean, the rest of the goals I don't think even match up to that. I love the way you said that.
Yeah. All right.
Hell of a start.
Hell of a start. I love this. All right. But it just gets better. You know what's next, right?
Academia.
I was going to say rocks, but yes, academia.
Your love for rocks in the beginning, man. So
Sometimes can be both.
Yeah.
Rocks and academia go together.
Hand in hand.
So let's just start it, man. I mean, if you had a 2-minute version before we get into your undergrad, was there a point where you were either outdoors and you're like, I love everything that I'm doing out here and that's what I love about rocks? Or was it somebody that came into your life, or was it during undergrad?
It was just being a kid. I mean, throwing rocks and then actually looking at the rock before I threw it, and hey, this is a cool looking thing. What is this?
I'm not going to throw an unconsolidated sandstone at this guy. I'm looking for granites.
That would hurt. No, I think, being young, I've always been intrigued about how nature works. I've always gravitated toward looking at and observing nature. Just early on, it just was outcrops. I see a big panel of some kind of whatever you want. It could be sandstone, limestone, shales, whatever, granite, 3 billion year old granite panel sitting right in front of you. I went up to it and looked at it, even when I was a little kid. But I think one of the things that really, I guess, coalesced it for me is my parents provided me the opportunity to go on a cross-country trip for the entirety of one summer between my, it would have to be, I think it was my 8th grade year and my 9th grade year.
Are we talking the annals of the former world right now? Go ahead.
So we took this trip, and it was essentially almost hit every state in the union.
From where to where?
Right?
Talk to us about that.
We started in Rochester, New York, and we just hit almost every state in the lower 48.
What?
And we visited almost every national park we could, any kind of natural spot we could. Of course, we had to stop at Cannon Beach in Oregon. I mean, come on, this is our namesake, right?
That was really that was the underlying reason.
But there's some cool seamounts out there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can see those. I mean, hey, look at those. So I think that coalesced it for me, looking at all of nature and what geology can offer to you at the surface, seeing all that in a matter of 3 months, just all up against each other, I think really set the tone in my brain and said, hey, this is something you're passionate about. This is something that you need to carry forward.
I don't know how you had that mindset as a kid.
That's awesome.
I mean, in 9th grade, I was riding dirt bikes and just chasing things, right? I didn't have the mindset of like, wait a minute.
Well, so was I, but I saw rocks and decided it was cool.
Wow.
And it was, what's really funny is that, once I carried it through and I had this love for it, I didn't really think that it could be even I mean, I knew geology was a major, right? But I didn't really
something that's viable.
know that it would be something viable that I could do, right? I mean, you grow up and you say, who are people that have a scientific background or a mathematic background? What do they go do? They go be an engineer, right? Or go be a doctor or go medical professional or something like that. And well, when I started my undergrad, I was an engineer.
Oh, nice. What year was this? We're into undergrad now. What school was it called again?
So I had a tortuous path through undergrad. My degree was actually conferred at SUNY Brockport. But after I finished high school, I started at Virginia Tech. I was there for about 2.5 years. And I decided that it just wasn't the right place for me.
Whoa.
It was out of state. So, and I was paying my way, and out of state tuition is not cheap.
Yeah.
So, after that, I just decided to stop going to school for a little while. Kind of rambled around a little bit. And then
Little self-discovery.
Yeah, here and there. But then after a little while, I said, no, I really need to do this. I need to go back, and I started part-time, but then I started full-time again. And that's when I really, truly switched from engineering to geology. I took some geologic courses at Virginia Tech to start, but I didn't do a major change, if you will, until I went to SUNY Brockport. And then I just hit it hard, from once I started going full time. I took out essentially one semester was just all those little core credit classes that you have to take in order to get a degree somewhere, right? So I got to take improv theater. That was fun.
Nice. One of my favorite classes.
I know, it was great. But but I just hit it hard, and I was taking like 21 credit hours a semester and wanted to be done quickly because it wasn't.
You're ready to go.
I was ready to go. When I started going full time, I was 26. Right, so I was like, "Hey, I gotta keep going."
Well, I mean,
here.
you're going to school for a purpose. You're not there to have a good time. You're there to get a degree,
there to
and
get
then
a degree.
to move on.
Gotta move on.
It's just a step in the process. That's all it really is.
But SUNY Brockport was a great place. I can probably give it a shout out on this
Let's hear
podcast.
it.
This is great.
Sounds like CLU on the East Coast.
Yep.
And they had somewhere between 4 to 5 students per class. And that was it.
Wow.
Right. So
incredible that it was even running.
But no, I mean they were a great set of professors, very energetic.
Nice. Structural, sed strat. What kind of professors were they?
Structural, sed strat. Were all taught by the same person.
I saw it. Same.
Dr. Whitney Otan. Got to give him a shout out.
Yeah. Since
there it is.
1835. Is that what that logo says?
Uh-huh.
What the hell?
It's New York, man. This is the Northeast.
Just talking rocks.
It's been around
since
a while.
1835. That's like original professor was like steno.
No, it's a great place. SUNY system is kind of weird. So, a lot of folks from other parts of the country
those images, P.
are used to seeing.
Was that it?
That's it right there. Yeah, There you go.
Wow.
That's it. Actually, that's how big it is. It's not that big.
Yeah. Are those the dorms at the end, or is that a hotel?
Yeah, those are high-rise dorms at the end.
Nice.
So I didn't have to live in them because I started halfway through. I transferred a lot of my credits from Virginia Tech. So
That looks beautiful.
I was only there for 2 years. But what's great about the place and why I went there is it's close to home. I mean, literally, that campus is 15 minutes from where I grew up.
Perfect.
So,
Mom, do my laundry.
Yeah, it's very cheap, right? Cost effective.
You got food at home? You got any leftovers?
Right.
No, bring it to me. But no, it was a great place to start my journey in geology, I would say.
Felt just super well-rounded. Is that the idea? Okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what was really great is that we had a very small graduating class.
You roll from Brockport into Penn State.
Yeah. It was part of my senior thesis at Brockport, actually, that got me to Penn State.
So you had connections internally at Brockport that were at Penn State, or how did you build that?
So my senior thesis, I was really interested already in structural geology at that point. And for our senior thesis, we had a full-on, essentially a senior thesis. You spent the entire year basically coming up with a research program, coming up with some kind of prescribed observation and collection program for that particular research project that you wanted to do. And then you went all the way through writing a document and presenting it to essentially the board of professors there, only 4 of them. But what was great about it is it got me prepared for thesis research, right?
Yeah.
Because it was very similar in structure.
Right.
So what I decided to do was fracture characterization in the Ithaca siltstones in Taganock Park, which is on the southern end of Cayuga Lake, very close to Ithaca. And this particular field location was a pretty well-renowned field location for fracture studies within the past. So I said,
Field
"Hey,
opened? I mean, this...
Oh, these are we're just looking at fracture patterns and mechanical interfaces, and, looking at that kind of stuff. We're not talking about oil and gas analogs at this point. So what was great about it is that we had this great field laboratory, and it said there's been a ton of research that's been done in this area. So I need to go out. Obviously, the first thing you do when you get your project and you essentially, want to figure out what you want to do is you do a literature review. And this name kept popping up in my literature reviews. Terry and Gelder, Terry and Gelder, Terry and Gelder, Terry and Gelder. I was like, after the 10th time his name popped up, it's like, I need to call this guy.
Nice.
Because he's done a ton of research down here, and he's close by. He's at Penn State. So went and basically contacted him, sent him an email and said, hey, I doing a literature review here, and your name's popped up an awful lot. I'd like to pick your brain in terms of like what I'm doing. and see if you have any kind of suggestions on how I should go about this, any kind of suggestions in how I should implement my field program, any suggestions on where I should take my research so it's novel, right? So I'm not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
And we met out in the field, actually at Tegonic Park, with his current PhD student, Amy Whitaker. And she was just finishing up her PhD and was doing some last minute observations and measurements out there. And we basically just met each other in the field out there, and
The rest is history.
the rest is history. About 2 months later, he asked me, "Hey, you want to come be my student at Penn State?" And I said, "Sure, why not?"
Dude, I tell undergrads all the time at UTVB, they want to go off and do something specific. Just research it. All you have to do, if you are interested in this subject, there is a professor out there that would love nothing more than a fresh graduate student that is interested in what he's doing. You set intention
No
in
doubt.
front of you and you just went. I don't know why, but people just don't do that, man, in my opinion. And that probably just speaks volumes to where you are today.
You have to go to it. You can't
right.
let it come to you.
Gosh, say it again, Cannon.
Quote it, put it under the podcast.
We're quoting it. All right, so Penn State, what'd you do for your thesis? And then we'll get into young professional.
Okay, so my thesis at Penn State was on fracture characterization of the Sawtooth Range in Montana. It was a modern take of what David Stearns had done in the early 60s at Teton Anticline. In fact, the Stearns model is still used today in a lot of geomodel softwares for fracture characterization around folded media. And
Cool.
the way we kind of approached this and said, at the time when they built, essentially when he built his model for fracture generation on folded media, 40 years of linear elastic fracture mechanics transpired, and there's some new observations and some new constructs that can be taken when you look at these observations in the field. There was, don't ever want to put anyone under a bus, but there was some, I would say, mischaracterization of fracture trends, or what appeared to be fracture trends. That were also, I think, mistakenly considered coeval to fold generation at Teton Anticline, but actually predated fold generation.
Wow.
And were carried up onto the structure. And kind of serendipitously looked like, essentially this conjugate shear package along with bisecting angle fracture. Well, a lot of those the conjugate fracture sets we saw at Teton Anticline were
They all predated that.
they all predated and were essentially the strain markers of the progressive deformation that the Sawtooth Range went through before it culminated with Teton Anticline being folded at the end of the toe of the ramp thrust.
Uh-huh.
That is
So-
awesome.
So we characterized all that as predated, and then were carried up onto the structure and then further reactivated into wrench systems that we characterized throughout. And I did my thesis in conjunction with another PhD candidate that was going to Imperial College at the time. She's actually a professor at University of Nebraska right now, Kara Burberry. And she did kind of the broad macro structural look. She was looking at the actual evolution of the structural front and how Teton Anticline was emplaced within this broad structural culmination. So my fracture work kind of complemented her work, and her work complemented my work, and so it was kind of a natural combination of efforts.
So do you think nowadays that model that you guys kind of worked upon is used more often when you're characterizing these fracture sets on anticlines? More or less, the fracture sets were initiated prior to the folding of the anticline and then possibly reactivated.
So I think what probably was a better way to think about it is that everything is site-specific.
Okay.
Right? So Teton Anticline had a certain set of conditions that created a fracture system, a characterizable fracture system that we see today. Do other folds exhibit the same type of fracture patterns? No, because they all have their own certain set of circumstances and how they are created. And those certain sets of circumstances are going to govern how these folds and how these rock bodies carried up into these folds are going to fracture. So I think what a lot of folks have to do is they have to step back a little bit and simplify the process. You know, the old keep it simple, stupid mantra that a lot of people do. And look at what are the things that are consistent from fold model to fold model to fold model to fold model in terms of fracturing, and carry those through. Those are the ones that you should base a lot of your models upon. You don't want to make a model too overly complicated, because if you're making a model too overly complicated, then you get this wide band of results that are really hard to justify, or really hard to prove, right? Because if you have a wide band of results, then you have a lot of variables you have to test.
Yeah.
And testing tons of variables in our industry is very expensive. So let's narrow it down to a key amount of outputs that we can test, and be smart about it.
I would agree with that approach, definitely.
Yeah.
But thinking about it while you're talking, getting to a finished product of a model and keeping it simple, stupid, and making that work across models, what about going back towards where the lady that's now at Nebraska, it sounds like she was probably working on bigger regional, maybe tectonics that were setting up this region. So what about, instead of working on the final product of the model, which is what we need to do, putting somebody back on what she was doing tectonically and now working igneous and figuring out your major convergent vectors that set up the region just from the very, very beginning?
That's a component. We didn't get that far back into history, if you will. She was dealing more with the thin skin tectonics that governed the severe orogeny at the time. But there was also components within the basement architecture that governed a lot of the what we saw in the severe orogeny within that particular area. You know, there was one of the great things about that particular field area in particular is there was what I would consider kind of a tightening of the thrust, basically the thrusts with back from the structural front. Most thrust angles you see in thin skin tectonics are in that 35 degree range. These were almost at 55 degrees. So what happened is you had this basement high in front that was impinging that entire thrust belt. And what it was causing was over-steepening of those thrusts.
Cool.
And as you had progressive deformation. But in other areas that didn't have this, you had very typical, very normal, thin skin tectonics that allowed for, more typical modeling type angles of thrust vergence, was around the 35 degree range.
Love it.
So there was a lot of complexities even right there within that same belt, that you had to have that basement architecture in order to really understand what was going on underneath. So that was a component of the study. In fact, our paper just got published, Geological Society of London. I'll forward you guys the link.
Nice. P-Dog, pull it up.
But we just published that article on that combined effort in the Teton Anticline area.
Cool is
and
that?
A lot of that information is provided within that publication. So.
And I think it's a common theme, I think, as our guests come on this show, that we go through academia I think everyone that's listening can relate to a solid academic career. Like, as geologists, it's not super fundamental. I mean, it depends on who you're learning from and how you progress to your graduate degree and what you were excited about. Everybody's got a little bit different of a story. I think all of us have a very technical story, and getting our degrees is difficult. If I could just be biased for a minute, getting a geology degree is difficult. It's a lot of work.
It is.
It's a lot of work. So that's awesome, man. I thought that was a perfect way to sum all that up in
Yeah.
academia. Skips, you got something to add? That was awesome. I know for you,
Well,
that was awesome.
Yeah. When are we going to Outcrop?
I do have to add one thing. We are. So, sorry.
That was awesome. This is the paper that you just published?
I can't tell where this is from.
We got Cannon there. Look at that. DI Cannon.
Man, where did you get this?
It's the first search on the Google.
I don't know if
What's
I
your
don't-
middle name?
Leonard.
Oh, it's an L. I got it.
Yeah, family name. I don't know if this is supposed to be out there in the interwebs. This is the unfiltered manuscript, if you will. I actually think this is probably
Here we go.
something that's a little bit dated, if you will. Yeah, there you go. That's kind of the basement architecture. If you see within the area, you can see the Sawtooth Range kind of cartooned in with the label there. But you can look and you have the let's see the Peak Brady trend right there in the Pendroy Fault, kind of right out there where you see the little box to highlight where our field location was. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
That created the basement high. Those two features there.
Cool.
And back behind where you have the call out box, that's where you saw that extreme thrust fault steepening.
Okay.
And the Sawtooth Range to the north and to the south of that had much less angled thrust faults.
The trend of the thrust fault north of the Sawtooth Range is insane. You guys mapped that, and it's all thrusting like that?
Yeah, well, see, there's been additional study done in this area, and one of the current models right now for the Sawtooth Range is that actually the entire thing was a duplex complex. So you had that Lewis thrust, which is thrusting Precambrian sediments above everything, was actually overriding the Sawtooth Range, and the Sawtooth Range was this massive duplex. And that basement high created essentially a structural high at the time and caused differential erosion. And that Sawtooth Range is essentially a window into that duplex that was actually encapsulated within that major Lewis thrust trend that you can carry up almost 300 miles up into Alberta.
Geology.
And right there, right that little step, if you will, in the Lewis thrust, just past that's Glacier National Park. So a lot of the sediments you see at Glacier National Park are actually that belt supergroup Precambrian sediments that were thrusted over everything. There's a great exposure right along. There's a road serendipitously where are you going? There's a road right there where you can kind of see East Glacier Park. There's a road that runs parallel to that jog in the thrust there.
Cool.
Obviously, right? Because, that's going to dictate, it's obviously going to dictate some geomorphology in the area. So there's a road surface there. But you can actually look up into the side of the mountain range at Glacier National Park and see the Lewis thrust and see the belt supergroup riding right on top of Cretaceous rocks. It's just pretty insane.
Yeah,
it's
intense,
really
man.
easy to call out too.
Yeah. That's right. Man, that was a great way to end the first segment of academia, I think. So how we're going to do your young professional career, which is absolutely fascinating, is we're literally just going to read your LinkedIn to the audience. One of the major points is people that are young professionals and they're kind of skipping around companies or looking for a VP of geoscience or an exploration manager position. They need to redo their LinkedIn if it does not sound like yours. If they have the experience like you do, some people just don't have that experience. But however, some people just don't spend enough time talking about their truly their experience. Take a step back, write out your experiences, and let's just listen to how your LinkedIn for the first 6 years of your career sounds. So ConocoPhillips, straight out of grad school. ConocoPhillips, development geologist for Madden Anticline Large Laramide Structural Trap. Little Monument Unit, the Moxa Arch Dry Gas, the Bakken and Three Forks, the Drunkard's Wash, CBM, what is that?
Coal bed methane.
Coal bed methane in the Uinta Basin, the Uinta and Northeast Echo Springs Cretaceous tight gas sands. Also worked as primary exploration geologist for the Lewis Shale in the Red Desert Basin, tight oil prospect, and the Heath Lime in the Central Rift Basin of Montana. Led effort to initiate BLM exploratory unit in Wyoming to facilitate Lewis Shale appraisal and future development. That's your stint at ConocoPhillips. It was a little over a year, right?
Oh, no. I was there for about 3.5 years.
I don't know why I don't have that. 3.5 years at Conoco. Then you take a job with Samson, geologic advisor for company development teams, and conducted prospect generation and land acquisition recommendations for corporate level exploration division. So this is almost exploration management role. It kind of sounds like in the beginning. Part of the exploration team that developed alternative depositional models for the Shannon and Sussex that ultimately led to better reservoir predicting and prospect generation outside of established production.
Well, first we need to. I just want to ask, what were these alternative depositional models that were created?
So it was kind of a little bit of multiple working hypotheses, right? Randy Martinson done a lot of work in Powder River Basin, looking at essentially these isolated sand bodies within the Shannon and Sussex and all, Parkman and all these. But essentially, what the common industry literature showed is that those surfaces those sand bodies were essentially kind of the lower shore face sand bodies that the upper shore face was scalped off, if you will, through transgression within the Cretaceous Seaway.
So you actually didn't see those in the geologic record. You just saw the
lower shore face
yeah.
facies,
okay.
And that's essentially what you had left, if you will. And that's it in a nutshell. I'm sure Randy can go through it in a lot more detail than I can. But we were looking at them at alternatively potentially being sourced through more tidal influence, actually being within a kind of a shallow sea, kind of shallow embayment depositional environment, and those sand bodies actually being more related to tidal influence, because we saw a lot of their character within the outcrops and then even within the subsurface data that we had in the cores as being related to tidal influence instead of these offshore bars that essentially the tops were scalped off. And we took that depositional model and understood sand placement within that depositional model and said that these fields tended to have the same properties as that, just from the data that we had at the time. And it led us to essentially our overarching hypothesis that we should probably step away from the
lower shore face model, or
step away from the higher quality sands and potentially be within a situation where we have lower quality sands, but because the permeability ranges are so low, the internal pressures, the hydrocarbon-initiated pressure was still trapped within that sand body in the tight stuff. So what we ended up seeing was that a lot of those sand bodies, when we would drill them and bring them on, had very high overpressure. You could be 2.5 miles from a field within the very high quality sand that was remaining within that overall depositional environment that was very well depleted by vertical wells that were drilled in the 50s and 60s, right? So you had an underpressured environment within the vertical field, and then you step 2 miles away and you have a pore pressure gradient within the related sand bodies that are anywhere about 0.65 to 0.7 psi per foot. So you have this huge transition of pressures that we saw being related to just lower quality sands. But that didn't necessarily mean that they did not have economic hydrocarbon saturations. Obviously back in the vertical days, you don't drill those things just because the permeability is low. It's the same story in the Midland Basin, right? I mean, the Sprayberry trend has been around for how long now?
Right.
Yeah.
World's largest uneconomic oil field. They've been drilling these tight sands for decades and decades. And when prices go up, it's economic. Prices go down, it's not. But now we can link these things up laterally and make bonds or wells. Well, it's kind of the same model being taken to just a different depositional environment.
Right. I think you can extrapolate that to the platform. I think there's platform players that have those concepts.
There probably is. Not too familiar with a lot of those folks, but so that was kind of what we were running with. I think there's still a lot of debate around that, especially those isolated sand bodies and what their true depositional environment was. Are we saying that our investigation was correct? No. I think it was just another hypothesis that could be tested.
Alternative.
And you always have to come into your work with multiple working hypotheses. You can't come into it with bias. Mm-hmm. If you come into an area, you come into a basin, you come into an asset area that you're going to exploit, if you have bias, you're going to end up destroying company value. Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of step back a little bit and put those biases aside and let the data talk to you. And that's kind of what we did at Samson there in the Powder River Basin.
To move on, also tasked with exploration in the Green River, Red Desert, San Wash, Uinta, and San Juan Basin. And so that San Juan Basin is where we started diving in a little bit because Skips has kind of a special place in his heart for the San Juan.
Very special place.
The SJB, as we call it. Lead assessment project in East Texas on the Eagleford equivalent Woodbine shale section as a tight oil play in addition to Buda and Georgetown fractured limestones and oolitic facies in the Glen Rose. In 2 positions, you've almost accomplished the lower 48.
It was fun.
Now that is the beginning of an excellent career, for sure.
The one who sees the most rock wins.
Okay, so then you go to Newfield exploration in Tulsa. So at Samson, you spent, looks like a year and 6 months. Newfield, you come in, you got a year and 3 months in Newfield. Geologist on NFX Mid-Continent Exploration and Assessment Team, currently exploring and assessing the Pennsylvania section of the Anadarko Basin. You are now in the scoop and stack as it develops. And one thing, anyway, we'll get there. I think Skips will dive in when we get there. You're working for, during the time, what seemed like in Tulsa and Oklahoma, in the heart of these future like public companies that are about to grow. I mean, when you think of Samson and Newfield and ConocoPhillips for one, but the other two, Samson, Newfield more so, like these companies are on the verge of just exploding. I mean, how close were those companies to be a Diamondback in that at that time?
Well, as a lot of people know about the history of Samson, it was when I came aboard, it was just shy of its 40th year as a private family-run company. Based always out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, started by the Schusterman family. And the daughter of the founder took the company over when he passed away, did a fantastic job of being able to grow and expand the company and its success across the lower 48 and even a little bit international. I mean, they had some assets up in Canada and I believe they also had assets in the Gulf of Mexico. So they were a multi-play company at the time. However, I think she may have just been done. She wanted to focus on her efforts in the philanthropic front. She had the Schusterman Foundation she was also running, and she decided to sell the company to KKR, which was a leveraged buyout firm out of New York City. Not the most wanted buying company, if you will, or a purchaser, if you're an oil and gas company. Because, I mean, what's a leveraged buyout company's main goal? To extract as much value out of an asset that they have. And usually they tend to chop up an organization and sell it. So when that happened, it was literally 3 months after I started. when they sold the company to KKR. And myself, I was kind of like, uh-oh, what do I do here? You know, I mean, I left ConocoPhillips. I feel like I had a pretty good career trajectory there, but I wanted a different feel. I wanted the independent feel instead of a super major. So I moved to Samson because of that feeling that I got when I interviewed with them and I started with them. But then they changed and became this company that was bought out by this investment firm, essentially. And it was really hard to grapple with. And essentially, I told myself, I said, I'm going to give this company a year and see what happens. They all had these plans of taking the company public and all this other stuff, hitting IPO, and, it was all great and hunky-dory. The plan sounded great, but the execution as it came to be over that year just wasn't there.
Wow.
So after a year, I walked across the street and started working for a new field.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think there's people like that in Midland today, right? That's where Skip's was talking about Midland 1.0. This is kind of like what's happening here. People are just shuffling around and walking across the street, and they're in your shoes in Midland now. Mm-hmm. So we got to go back to the San Juan Basin. One, we just love the basin. We love the geology of that basin. And then have you heard of Project Plow Shore?
Yes.
Setting nuclear devices off in the subsurface to increase connectivity of these reservoirs.
Yeah, that's a hell of a frack job.
A hell of a frack job. So there's Project Gnome and there's Project, what is it called? Gas Buggy. Gas Buggy. Gas Buggy was a San Juan Basin one. And our CEO, Dave Thomas III, he remembers being in school when they said, get under your desk and everything's about to shake, and they set that thing off. He remembers that. So, okay, so that's the chimney that it makes. So zoom into that picture on the left. Yeah, that picture right there. That's the idea that the engineers and all these crazy bastards came up with, is that they're going to drill down to this thing, they're going to drop the nuclear device, set it off, and create this huge void in the subsurface, and it's going to create this crazy natural fracture system, and they're going to increase the recovery factor of this thing. I don't know what okay, so
well, it was in the pictured cliffs, so it was a similar scenario where you have this really tight reservoir, and they're just like, how do we make this reservoir permeable? Let's blow it up.
Yep, they literally did it. And so the nuclear bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. In San Juan Basin, they did 29 kilotons. Man, they pounded this thing. Truly incredible. And I've heard old timers talk about it when they gave this presentation at the WTGS. Around this site were incredible numbers. They were producing just ungodly amount of gas at first. And now you go back, they say it's oily. Yeah, around this area. So they did it on the east side of the San Juan Basin. I took a picture of it, but anyway, it's right across the border of, isn't the San Juan Basin the county in the very northwest? Is that the San Juan Basin? Yeah, San Juan County. Yeah, there it is. It's just east of that. That's kind of where that zone, that's where they did this test. Incredible. So the other pictures we have is Project Gnome. That's in the Guadalupe Mountains they decided to do this. They went horizontal and created this massive cave in the Guadalupe Mountains, just southeast of Carlsbad, 29 miles or something like that, southeast of Carlsbad. They set off a nuclear freaking warhead in the subsurface surrounded by, there's the article from the Oklahoma Geological Society or Survey that talks about this. This is the chimney thing that it makes. At the bottom is just this crazy radioactive, nasty thing that pools up at the bottom. It just pulverizes the rock. It turns into just this nasty liquid at the bottom, and then everything above it just caves in. They call it the chimney. And that's what it created. The crazy part is they let people in this thing, a newspaper guy and some scientist. Look, you could see someone standing in that image right there. That's the cave that the freaking atomic bomb set off. Get that image out of the way, P-Dog. Yeah. You can see the guy in all red. He's standing on those rocks. Zoom into B. Figure B. So there's where they set it off. Look at that guy standing there in the bottom of this thing, man. At 5 months, they said, after they set it off, they let these guys in. with overalls on, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you're good."
Yep. It's all gone. No more radiation. You got nothing to worry about.
Is this not insane? The stats behind this are truly unbelievable. As what the USGS. I mean, I don't know if it was USGS that got involved in this. I think it was. There was definitely some government things involved. However, the oil and gas company, or whatever the oil and gas company that was involved in this, something that no one's ever heard of. It wasn't Chevron, ConocoPhillips. It wasn't anything you've ever heard of that was involved on the make it oily side. There's another cavity void that it just created, and it was unbelievable that they did this. The program shut down because they started doing this at the near the surface to build canals to get water transportation built, and they started freaking killing people. I think that's how the story goes. They definitely started contaminating. Major contamination of the areas, and then that's finally
no way.
Finally, when the government came in, was like, "Listen, dipshits, this is getting out of control. You guys are just drunk and making decisions at this point, and we got to stop this." Unbelievable. Yeah. San Juan Basin, man, was part of it. They did the Powder River. They did it up. I think it was Powder River. They did it in Colorado for sure. I think in a carbonate. I don't even know how you like. Would you be a part of that, Ken? If someone came to you and was like, "Listen, this is what we're gonna do."
No.
If some service company comes in,
Yeah,
we have a great way to initiate a frac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they hit the limit. One of the last bombs they set off in the subsurface was truly the limit worldwide. All the countries came together and said, "All right, you can't test in one spot any more than this amount of kilotons." And we did that in America. Boom, we set it off. And then shortly after that, we started building canals with atomic bombs, and then we shut it down. We're like, okay, this has gone too far. But
I think one of the things that is in this article is the predication for ideas such as this. This was directly related to the arms race. There was research and activity of nuclear fracking in Russia too. And I mean, at that time in the U.S., it was be ahead of Russia or not. And we had to advance technologically through nuclear technology in order to be ahead of Russia.
wow.
So, I think a lot of this was really predicated upon the arms race. It wasn't really predicated upon, will this work for more resource capture? But it could have also been a test of their weapons. That was another thing that a lot of these projects were just tests of new weapons designs. Shielded under the guise of, hey, this is going to be a test of resource capture, right? But they're actually testing the weapon more than anything else.
And you got to be thinking too. I mean, at this time, there was such little information out there about the harm of like nuclear radiation. And I mean, I'm sure there was knowledge behind the scenes, but as far as public knowledge is concerned, it was really brushed under the rug. And on top of that, I mean, this whole scenario is just absolutely bonkers.
Insane. They called it friendly nuclear testing or something like that. Unbelievable.
They had a mascot for it and everything.
It's incredible, man. And so, yeah, I think the scariest part is that it feels like we're definitely well out of the jungle, but what's happening today, right? What kind of crazy ideas and tests are happening today is just a thought I had while we were just kind of going through that. I mean, it feels like we would make better decisions, but let's be honest, I think we're still gunslinging.
I would hope we would.
Yeah. All right, so that was bringing up San Juan Basin. Let's talk San Juan Basin geology for a minute. I mean, it's a complex basin, man. I mean, it goes Precambrian. I think there's some Devonian at the very bottom. Is that correct? And then it goes right into Cretaceous.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the areas that I was looking at, I wasn't actually assigned any of the San Juan Basin when I was at ConocoPhillips in particular, but there was a lot of heavy development of the gas resources there. The Lewis Shale being one of them, and
massive gas. Yeah.
Did you guys do any work in the Fruitland by chance at the time, or?
I think I'm not entirely sure if ConocoPhillips, you're testing my memory now.
Oh, yeah.
I believe we did. It was all through the acquisition of Burlington Resources.
Okay.
Burlington Resources, when they had a Farmington office. They had a massive position within the San Juan Basin. And ConocoPhillips took it over, and it was basically already a very mature gas field at that point. So there really wasn't a lot of investment going on. And after I left was when there was a lot of study and a lot of exploitation of the Mancos on the southern slope of the San Juan Basin, which is pretty active now. Gallup.
I mean, you can see the trend. I mean, that's where I started at Trey. That's why San Juan holds a very special place in my heart. Yeah, I was evaluating a prospect out there. And,
there it is.
And just understanding that Gallup Mancos trend, and that's really what was blowing up at the time. And it was like, hey, they're drilling some wells out here. This is something, and then now it's just littered. That whole area. You can just follow that Mancos Gallup trend just throughout the basin at this point.
I think my favorite part of doing some San Juan research, we were dabbling a little bit of it in at Samson, San Juan Basin, and it was really funny as we went to go look at some core at the New Mexico Bureau of Mines that they had in Socorro, and basically their core facility is a bunch of those steel pole barns that are un-air conditioned, and we went out there in the summer.
Thanks, guys.
And it was about 105 degrees outside. So inside these things, it was probably about 140. I think some of you guys know who John Bertolot is.
Oh, yeah.
He was my intern at Samson
Nice.
when he started. And he was the one that had to go and get all the core out of that. So
You got it, bud.
You got it, bud. You get to deal with the heat.
It's just water.
But we were just looking at some of the Mancos cores in that to help calibrate some of our models that we were developing with our geochemist at the time. She was developing a correlation between our XRF measurements and XRDs. So we were collecting samples there for that. The Mancos shale is really thick. A couple thousand feet thick, if I remember right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Cretaceous age, as is everything in the intermontane basins.
That's
of
right.
The
That
Western
string
US.
of Cretaceous basins, very strange.
So the Mancos shale is relatively thick. There's some source beds, concentrated source beds within it. A lot of the Mancos is also kind of marly, so there's just some kind of more carbonate sourced organics within it as well. And of course, those kind of organics coupled with the heterogeneous, kind of more typical marine, kind of soupy
mud rock
type organics, those are going to be differential in terms of maturation products, right? In terms of what is being actually expelled out of that rock at whatever thermal stress that they're at. So the Mancos, I would say, is likely your source bed within that sequence.
I would agree. Now, the crazy part is getting the pressure and the conditions for that thing to produce as much oils and gas that it has in the short amount of time with the tectonic history.
Really, really, really tight rock. I mean, it's exposed, its surface to the south, but
incredible.
It's really, really tight rock. I mean, it can handle. You're talking about a Cretaceous rock that took, several million years to get the burial depth to be able to start generating hydrocarbons at that point in time.
Yeah.
But its geologic age, if you will, in terms of how it can move and mobilize hydrocarbons within the stratigraphy there is relatively short compared to, say, the Permian Basin.
Okay.
Where, the Sprayberry, the Wolfcamp, all those source beds were in the kitchen for a long time. And they had time to migrate. They had time to migrate laterally. They had time to migrate vertically if there was any kind of faulting or fracturing within the rock that was accessible at the time of migration. You had laramide reactivation of a lot of structures within the Permian Basin that allowed another expulsion event to occur and filling up reservoirs up and down the whole column. Whereas this you didn't have that iterative structural influence. You had
thing's
the
gotta be taken, so-
laramide,
okay.
and then you had the Colorado uplift.
Basin and
that's it.
range is not affecting the San Juan?
To a degree, it is. Basin and range, you got to remember when you have tensile forces or tensile stress within a rock, you can't propagate that very far. You can propagate compression an amazing amount. Usually whenever you look at structural fronts, say the basin and range edge, if you will, the actual structural influence away from the basin and range is relatively limited because of that tensile stress propagation through the rock. It doesn't go very far. But if you actually start pushing on the rock and you have compression, during a thin skin tectonic vent, in a severe orogeny or a thick skin like you had in the laramide, you can transmit those compressive stresses for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers.
Mother Nature's natural fracture.
Right. So, and what you see here is you have that initial compression, creating stresses throughout the basin and even beyond. But then really you only had the uplift, and then you had some of the basin and range influence on the far western side, which could have caused some enhanced fabric for, migration of those fluids up and out of the Mancus. But a lot of what was produced within the Mancus stayed relatively in place because just how low permeability it was, and it didn't have a lot of access, especially on the southern slope, to a lot of very complex structures. You get some crazy stuff going on to the north and to the northwest in the San Juan, but to the south, it's relatively gentle. You have some perturbations, you have some dip domain changes within the basement, but all in all, you don't have a lot of complexity in terms of structural. One of the areas that I worked with at ConocoPhillips, Madden Anticline, perfect example, Wind River Basin is actually quite small in terms of aerial extent of a basin, right? Well, I was deployed to a rig that was drilling an ultra deep well. It's called the Bighorn 10-5. It was the last well in the Madison limestone that ConocoPhillips was going to drill. We're talking ultra deep gas reservoir in the Madison limestone at 25 to 26,000 foot measure depth.
Holy shit.
We are talking about wells that would come on for 80 to 90 million a day and stay there for years. The whole field produced over 300 million a day from 8 wells.
Dude, the earth felt that. What?
So you're talking, and what was really interesting about it, what was really intriguing about it was just the mix of what you were actually producing. Say a well would come on at 90 million a day, 67% of that was methane.
Okay, so what else was it?
20% was CO2.
Whoa.
And 12% was H2S.
Oh.
Ooh. Yeah.
Ooh.
What?
Super acid gas environment.
I'm not mudlogging that well.
Yeah.
The wells costs had the same capital outlays as offshore wells. We were drilling in AFE wells for $90 to $100 million.
Oh my God!
But they would pay out in months with the amount of volume you were producing out of these things,
in
right?
2000 and something, when gas was like
2008, yeah.
Before it tanked.
Yeah, this is before it tanked, but it wasn't really that high. It was in the $7 range or so 7 to 8. So it was just a massive amount of gas that we were producing in that. And I was sitting on a drill rig and I'm looking straight down, because we're actively drilling right through the target interval. And I'm sitting there and saying, hey, cool, we're at like 25,500 feet measured depth right now. And all I have to do is look up, and there's the interval that we're drilling 4,000 feet above my head, about 8 miles to the north.
Dude, you have balls to drill that well.
It wasn't just me. It was the last well in that field.
I wouldn't even have stood on that well.
Someone else had balls to drill the first well.
I wouldn't even have stood on that well. The structural complexity that you're saying, how deep
massive. It was a
that
huge
structure
gas
goes.
field, and that was just that
Oh
one
my
interval.
Gosh.
So, and then all the intervals above it, the Frontier and the Mesa Verde and the Lower Fort Union, they're all extremely productive of gas. I mean, that was a massive, that whole area was in place. Reserves was well over 5 to 6 TCF from one very small constrained structure, within the intermontane basins of the Rockies. So amazing amount of accommodation was created in that area during the Laramide.
I wonder what the thoughts were on like the first well that was drilled. Just I don't know if it would have been surprise or just the amount of.
They were dancing in the streets with how much gas there
Yeah.
was. I mean, it's just those kind of rates at that time are amazing.
Incredible.
So,
it scares me.
But I want to know who the guy is who initially proposed that. That just put that on the desk and said, hey, we know it works here. We know it works here. Let's go down 25,000 MD and, let's shoot our shot. We don't know what's coming.
Can you get that research done? Can you find out who that was? We will have him on the show.
We can find out who it was, and probably pretty easily. But the crazy thing is that, in order to outlay that kind of capital, it wasn't just a hunch.
Mm-hmm.
They did a lot of work
Yeah.
to justify what that was, right? To justify the expense of drilling that. A lot of people look at these wildcatters out there just flinging holes in the ground and hoping and praying. No, there's a lot of work that goes into it. So I have to assume years of research that went into drilling that first well in the field, right? So so a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and definitely a lot of intellectual capacity went into proposing that well. So
you had a lot of intellectual capacity to get through those 3 companies, man. I mean, you were hopped around all over the place and expected to just get it and start making some kind of contribution to the company. I mean, fascinating story, man, in your young professional career. It really is, and I think inspirational to a lot of people that would be listening to this stuff. Before going into Diamondback, and we're probably going to end up going into this, but before going into Diamondback, would you change anything about the first 10 years of your career?
no,
Not a thing.
not a thing.
You wouldn't try to strategically get somewhere else?
It is not worth Monday morning quarterbacking your career, because honestly, you have to be proactive with where you're going to be, right? So if you're proactive with where you're going to be, you do your best to understand where you can see yourself 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And what comes to you is what comes to you. And sometimes things are out of your control. And you just...
Like Samson.
You just have to roll. You just have to understand where's the best opportunity next.
But at
for
the
me
end
to
of the,
be.
but at the end of the day, you need to look back at those 10 years and
You
say,
do.
I put it all on the table when I needed to, not more or less. I was just kind of skimming through and hoping I was going to get to this point. I was hoping to just climb the corporate ladder. That's not how this was going to work.
I've told you guys this before, I mean, a lot of folks believe that career advancement in our industry and even other industries is all based upon who you know, right? But I firmly believe it still is what you know. And the reason why is because what you know gets you into a network of who you know.
Exactly.
So, if you have a strong acumen in terms of what you are as a geologist or what you are as an engineer or even a landman within this industry, that's going to predicate who you know within this industry and where that next opportunity is going to be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I tell you now, segueing into Diamondback, my supervisor when I started, and still today, Paul Molnar, he's still there.
Paul Molnar.
He was my supervisor at ConocoPhillips. He was my hiring manager at ConocoPhillips.
Wow.
So knowing the right people gets you in the right doors, but it's because of what you know, not because of just who you know. Honestly, I'll tell you right now, starting ConocoPhillips gave me the platform to be able to be where I'm at today in terms of the wealth of training opportunities that I had set in front of me.
Heard all about that. Yeah.
But the culture that was here in Midland, Texas, for the ConocoPhillips office that was here, completely different from what it was in Houston, Texas. I mean, my career trajectory, my path would be completely different if I started my career at ConocoPhillips in Houston.
Whoa.
Completely different. I believe that to this day, because the culture that was in Houston was built and constructed and massaged over decades of being a very large company. Right?
Okay.
That corporate culture.
Okay.
Right? That very
Get in your box.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And in Midland, Texas at the time when I hired on, it was just fresh from being acquired by ConocoPhillips, because this was the Burlington office out here. And there was a lot of Burlington employees. In fact, we called it, it was essentially the Burlington office. It wasn't the ConocoPhillips office. I mean, it was that same independent entrepreneurial spirit type of culture that was still very active and still very present in the office
Inspired
here when
you.
I
That's
started.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what gave me the correct foundation to start my career. I mean, the mentors I had at the Burlington office, I'll call it the Burlington office, here in Midland, were really what set me on a path of where I am today.
Wow.
So, and I always have to tell this story too. You know, when I interviewed with Paul, he's from Western New York too. I'm from the Rochester area, and
What do you know?
he's from the Buffalo area. So he'll probably slap me if he hears this. But my interview consisted of about 10 minutes of geology talk and 50 minutes of Buffalo Sabres hockey talk.
Yes.
And afterwards, I'm like internally fist pumping because I'm like, oh, I got this job.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. All right, man. So we're not going to dive into Diamondback. We were kind of out of time. I think we can, if you're willing, schedule a second show with Dave Cannon. I think people would love to hear that. We have a lot of content that we can take from this show, I think, and develop a second show. But we're coming 30 minutes into time. The only thing I wanted to point out about Diamondback is that when we researched this, there's a Marvel villain called Diamondback. Okay? And this villain, here's what happens. The villain creates sonic waves. Okay? He releases toxic gases. I don't think we're toxic, but we release gases. And what he does is he has specially gimmick knives that explode. And so our correlation to that, or at least mine was, that our horizontal wellbores are these specially gimmick knives that are slicing through the earth, and they explode. And they create sonic waves. There's Diamondback right there. And they create sonic waves.
It's a scary looking guy.
and we got some, we released some gases out of this thing. I mean, do you think Travis Stice would say that he thought of Diamondback the name after a Marvel comic when he was a kid?
No.
Is there any chance?
Absolutely not.
All right,
It was worth a shot. It was worth a shot.
It was. Hey, but if we do get the opportunity to bring you back on the show, man, I think there's a lot we can dive into that's truly just thought-provoking and captivating to people that are listening to us. It certainly is to us, and I think we relate to a lot of people in this industry as young professionals. So we would be honored to have you a second time. However, man, your presentation that we're looking at right now, the beginning of where do we go from here, this is something that I actually tweeted Donald Trump, our president. I did this. I tweeted him and said, you need to be present for Dave Cannon's talk in Midland. We are in the heart of the Permian Basin. We're in the heart of the oil and gas industry in America, and Dave Cannon is about to unload the clip on what's happening in our future. And I invited him. There was actually someone random was like, how do I see this on Twitter? I'm like, hold on, we're still setting it up. Get Trump involved. And we couldn't do it, right? But the president-elect AAPG, Denise Cox, was very interested in trying to make this talk when you gave it at UTPB, at the second annual symposium at the UTPB. This is the first time the world heard this, man. And I saw it when we met before the presentation, and I'm like, this is it. This is what everyone needs to hear. This is truly the pathway. As we see two forks in the road in this image, this is the pathway for our generation. It's up to us to figure this problem out. And every one of our listeners, and I think we truly can reach hundreds of thousands of people who are dedicated to figuring this out. And you just articulated it perfectly with sound defense, right? With these graphs that we're about to see and what you speak to in our industry right now, what's going to happen. And it goes to this recovery factor problem. We can't just simply put more wellbores in the earth to just get more energy. We need to increase our recovery factors at each wellbore. Why can't we put less wellbores in the ground and increase our recovery factor? That works too, to the problem, instead of just putting more wellbores in the ground. That's a huge topic in the industry. I think it's an elephant in the room. A lot of people don't like talking about it. You don't have to address that exactly. However, your presentation really does go through what's happening technically, engineering, and what it's missing, in my opinion, is some deep geology. We need some deep geology in this presentation to what's next, man. Our depositional environments and our understanding of the earth is primitive, in my opinion, to what's developing on the front lines of geology with plate tectonic theory and different things. There are some major things that could be taking place, and we should be getting after that. There's geology that's still involved. The rock, just like you said, he who sees the most rock wins. There's still that aspect to this. So we have technology, we have engineering, we have a problem. I think rock and being geoscientists, we should be motivated. We should be waking up before our alarms go off to get after this problem every day. We should be excited to go to work because of what you're presenting right now.
Wow. Breathless over there, aren't you? So, a lot of those things that you just said, I think, are pieces of the problem. It all wraps up into innovation, right? It all wraps up into how do we become more efficient as an industry? Because the way I've predicated this presentation isn't so much about how we can continue to provide as some kind of a social service, if you will, to our country and our world, but in terms of how do we in the oil and gas industry continue to be at the forefront of that industry as we move forward. I think one of the things that you see as you run through history of energy and run through history of other industries in general in terms of what's been developed and technology that's been developed is that you have moments where those industries, those companies, those innovations, they become complacent. And eventually when you become complacent, you get replaced. And all us being young professionals within this industry, I mean, we certainly don't want to be replaced, right, in terms of where we go from here. So one of the things I really like to put our industry in, and especially the Permian in general, is this theory that was actually introduced in 1962 by Everett Rogers, called Diffusion of Innovations. I think it's a very elegant model and how we can show how an idea, how an innovation, how a technology can move through a social system. And a social system is very broadly defined. You can have a social system that is a classroom. You can have a social system that's a company, a social system that's an industry or a country or the citizenry or the world itself. So the way I've predicated this one in particular is the social system that we have to prove the concept to is our industry, right? Our oil and gas industry and within the energy industry in general. So you kind of see from this graph, it kind of lays out some of the key steps along the technology adaptation curve that Rogers presented so long ago. And you can see that there are different steps along the way from that very initial idea, that very initial construction of the technology and the adaptation of that technology. And that first part is essentially the innovators. Those are the ones first through the wall, right? What's the phrase? First through the wall is the one with the bloody nose, right? Well, all those guys have bloody noses.
And specifically, we're talking the horizontal and hydraulically fracturing in 2007.
For the Permian, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so these are the companies that are the innovators. They're the ones that are out there and stepping out and trying to understand, can we do this horizontal technology and this hydraulic fracturing like we've done in the Barnett,
right,
like we've done in other areas,
the frackers.
that can it work here? Can this work here? And that's your initial innovators phase. And then you move to early adopters. These are the guys that look at that and said, hey, that's a really good idea, but I can make it better. And we'll show here in a little bit, those companies are pretty prevalent throughout the Permian now, Diamondback being one of them. And then we're never the first to the wall. We're always the fast followers. We're always the ones that say
Pretty solid plan.
we're always
We
the
like
ones,
it. We're in.
Yeah, we like it. We're in. We're going to do it better than you.
You're punching the hole. I love
So
it.
what you have next
Hey,
after
numbers
that,
don't lie at the end of the day.
Let's be
early
honest.
adopters is what's called the chasm, right? So that is the moment in time that innovation has to have social proof. Social proof can mean a lot of things too. It depends upon the social network or that social group that you're trying to prove it to. Within our industry, what does it mean? Cost effectiveness, economic viability, right? That's our social proof. So if something is worth the investment that we're putting into it, we're going to invest in it. It's going to jump over that chasm and be able to continue to be adopted by the early majority. And the early majority, basically, now you're starting to get more rushing in. You're starting to get more to adopt. You're almost getting to 50% adaptation at this point. That's a lot of people following that curve. And you actually start getting large amounts of the products of that innovation, which I'll show here in a little bit, which is oil production in the Permian, right? And then from there you move through late majority. These are the folks that are really kind of late to the game, but they're still adapting, they're still innovating, they're
Who's
still
that in the
bringing
Permian?
new things to the game. Well, those are the majors, right?
Who's that?
So I'll show you in a little bit. So those are the majors, right? Those are the guys who it takes a little bit more for them. You have to prod them a little bit to get in. But man, once they come in, guns blazing.
XTL.
Yeah. Well, they're Exxon now, so they're a subsidiary of Exxon, but
They're guns
technically,
blazing.
They're Exxon. Then past that, you move to the laggards. These are the last ones to the show, right? This is that friend that shows up 3 hours late to your party and just shows up like he wasn't late.
Make
right?
a prediction right now. Who is it? Who's late to the game?
I'm not going to say it.
I'll say it. Let me think. I'm going to say Parsley is going to be late to the game.
They're not that late to the game. I'd say they're early majority.
They're going to spend a bunch of money
yeah.
on acres that looks good, but it's not that good.
So the laggards phase, in my opinion, a lot of people think that the chasm is a dangerous place to be, because it's hard to get that social proof. A perfect case in point is electric vehicles, right? So Elon Musk wasn't the first one to create an electric car. I mean, electric cars have been around since the 60s, right? So, and what was before the Tesla? I mean, you had like the Nissan Leaf.
Oh,
You
yeah.
had these other crazy looking cars that looked like beans on wheels. I mean, they were just awful looking, and they had a range of like 40 miles. If you had the
You
right
can,
weather.
you can go to the grocery store and back. That
Yeah.
was literally all they were for.
It was great if you lived in an urban center in Europe, right? That's about as far as you can go with it. Tesla and Elon Musk, he's an early adopter. He said, hey, that's a great technology. I can do it. I can do it better. Right? And he did. He actually created a vehicle that is fit for purpose for Americans, because Americans have to drive more to get to their jobs, to get to their places of entertainment, get to their families, whatever you want to say. They drive more miles per year than any other culture within the world at this point. So he built a vehicle that can do that. They can drive 300 miles on one charge. Right? And they can charge now at supercharger stations in 20 minutes from full-on dead charge.
Wow. That's plenty of time. Drop a deuce and keep driving. It's perfect.
True.
Fucking Musk, man.
Drop the deuce, have
Drop
a
your
coffee.
deuce.
You're good, man.
Damn.
The best
Keep
part
going.
about it, though, is you're not driving a bean anymore. And on top of that,
It's a slick-looking car.
It is.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a hot-looking. You see a few of them around Midland. There's
We're gonna
some
get Musk
pretty
on the
hot-looking
show.
cars. Good luck.
Yeah.
So Tesla was great, but the problem is the social proof is still the same as it is for our industry. Economic viability. Can a family of four who's making $80,000 a year as squarely middle-class American afford a $75,000 car? No. They're going to go to the dealership and go get a Camry for $32,000, right? and finance that.
Yeah.
So this is an example of a technology that's languishing in that chasm. You can't push past it. That's why you look at companies like Ford and Chevy and all this stuff. Yeah, they're investing in electric vehicles. Yeah, they're producing a few of them out there, but they're not going into mass production.
That's right.
If they start going into mass production, that means that technology has jumped the chasm.
Wow.
And it has not occurred yet.
Cool.
So this is where
It's a
electric
matter of
vehicles
time.
are, right?
Cool.
I think in the oil and gas industry, especially in the Permian, there's really cool effects of those different parts of the graph, right? That relate to the production and relate to rate changes into production, which I think really go into where those different innovators, early adopters, or the majority really started to come through. So this graph here, this was from September of 2018. Federal Bank of Dallas stripped out some EIA information and provided this graph, which is just pure Permian production.
Cool.
You had essentially a low point, a bottoming, if you will, in about 2007.
That's right.
Which was at about 850,000 barrels a day. Right? Now think about this, 850,000 barrels a day. The entire Permian Basin is making 850,000 barrels a day. What did Pioneer just recently say that they wanted to be at 2025? They want to be 1 million barrels a day, right? They basically want one company is going to strive to make more barrels per day out of the Permian than the entire Permian Basin was making in 2007.
Love it.
So that's kind of the effect of what's going on in this area. 2018, fast forward, you had over 400% growth in oil production within 10 years. And that's insane. That's just an insane amount of production growth. What did it? Well, obviously you guys know what did it, right? Horizontal technology, ever pushing the ball forward on innovation, ever pushing the technology, ever pushing the geoscience, ever pushing the engineering, ever pushing the land deals. I mean, the land deals are a huge thing too.
Yeah.
Right? What gets you better efficiency is longer laterals. So getting better land deals structured is what's really going to drive a lot of production growth too. So let's take a closer look at that little graph that got down there to the lower central area, and I'll basically step through. So that first little line that you see there, oh yeah, now we're going to zoom in. This is great.
Here?
No, this first one way over there. Left, man.
Hey,
That little guy.
we got
There
it.
he
We
is.
found the line.
That is the Innovators. That is the production increase you see from the bottom. That happened in 2007,
2006.
2008.
Okay.
The Innovators are people like EOG, like Cimarex.
Oh, yeah.
Cimarex was drilling horizontal wells in the Delaware Basin and Bone Spring.
Michael
EOG and all those guys were drilling some horizontal wells in the Southern Midland Basin in the Wolfcamp. Approach Resources was another company who was really close to the Innovator stage as well. Then we had this weird little, what I call the sprash, which was that 2008 spike. It went up to like 154 barrels or $154 a barrel, and it crashed down into the 30s almost within months. Right? It was predicated because of the broader economic downturn. Right? You had this huge crash and popping of the real estate bubble, which caused all of this strife within the economy at the time. So it was really kind of a reaction to that. But because it was a reaction, it was short-lived, right? So you really started seeing the price come back up. I mean, it was like October 2009 when it reached the bottom in January. October, it was back up into the high 60s, almost $70 a barrel.
Yeah.
It was a huge overreaction to that downturn.
Yeah.
So what happened there is that you basically restarted. Because you were still in the innovator phase, and then boom, those wells were not economic anymore because price went to nothing.
Bullshit deal.
So you just restarted.
Okay.
You restarted the innovator phase. Well,
Similar slope.
few other companies came in as innovators, Apache being one of them. They were in pretty
they
early
felt
too.
like innovators.
They felt like innovators. But then what you see there in about 2010 is this really, 2010, 2011, you saw this really curious uptick in the production graph. You saw essentially more adaptation of the innovations within our industry. Then you had essentially the entry of the early adopters. Those are the ones who came in and said, hey, I like this. I'm going to do it better. Diamondback Pioneer, Concho, you had all those folks really starting to rush in and say,
the owners of
this is
Midland
great.
right now.
The owners of Midland.
That's
right
who
now.
you just mentioned.
So, and then what we had in 2013 as would postulate in this is the chasm. That's where we said, hey, this is economically viable. This is going to keep pushing forward. And then again, we saw another step rate change in the production graph as we moved past that chasm jumping event. And then you had a very short-lived end of 2013, mid 2014, early majority. Everybody started rushing in. I mean, you remember what this place was like in early 2014. It was nuts.
Crazy.
Right? Everyone wanted to be in Midland. Then you had the price equilibrium hiatus again. This time it was a little bit more longer lived. You actually had a glut in supply that you had to essentially get out of the system before prices could recover. So it takes a little bit longer for it to flush out, right? But if you notice, the production actually didn't ever really decrease. It actually just kind of went into a stasis and actually increased just a little bit. The rate of change was low.
Was it more or less just companies adapting within this period?
It was adapting to the low price environment. Seeing cost reductions from service providers, seeing more efficiencies that they could gain through operations, seeing more efficiencies that could gain through innovation. And I think what happened is because the chasm was already jumped and even at low oil price, you could continue to make money. You didn't revert back past the chasm. You kept ahead of the chasm at that point, which when prices recovered, what we saw wasn't this restart like we had in 2008, 2009. It just continued along the trend. Yeah. So yes, in 2014 and 2016, we had the price disequilibrium event where we had a glut of oil, right, that we had to flush out of the system. Took a little bit longer for the price to essentially come back to the industry in terms of being able to be economically viable. But I think what our industry really learned during this time was to become more efficient. And that efficiency was gained through not only drilling longer laterals, changing our completion designs and being able to get more out of the rock. But it was also coupled with a lot of the price reductions from the service industries. And that's what really helped the economic viability of our industry, even during the downturn. If you notice on the graph there, production is still increasing during that time. We had a broad decrease in overall U.S. oil production. We did not see that here. There was continued production increase even during the downturn. And what that really relates to is the fact that because of that, we did not reset. We did not reset back to, say, an Innovators phase because we still had social proof of the model here in the Permian. And because we were still essentially past that chasm, we felt like as we moved into true economic viability again, where a lot of plays started to open back up as the price rebounded, you basically moved into what I consider the late majority. That's when everybody else starts coming in. We have an internal phrase at Diamondbacks called, do you want to get on the rocket ship? Because that's what happened in 2016 to now. I mean, this area, this basin is just as crazy as it was in early 2014. I would say probably even more so, just because of what you see there on the far right, a dramatic increase in production. That comes with a lot of future problems that we have to figure out. There's a lot of technology and innovation that we have to continue to push in order to continue a trend like that. Because you butt up against infrastructure, right? And we're seeing that with differentials and not enough pipelines and things of that nature. We're just growing so fast on the production side that we can't take it away fast enough. So that's why we have the issues we have. But if you notice, even during that time in 2018, we were seeing those infrastructure constrictions. We were seeing that in the last half of 18. We still saw production going through the roof, right? So that is a testament to that innovation as you move forward. That is a testament of continuing to push your knowledge, continuing to push technology, continuing to think, and always think about multiple working hypotheses and not become biased to a particular theory or a particular way of doing things. One of the most hated phrases I have in my company, and even just in industry in general, is if it works, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I hate that phrase. I absolutely hate it, because you stop thinking if you say that. That means you're no longer able to push the technology forward.
That's right.
And that's when you become complacent. And that's when you're in the laggards phase, in my opinion, that's the most dangerous spot on the technology adaptation curve, is in the laggards, because you stop thinking. You stop pushing that technology, the 100% adaptation. And that is a period where if you continue to destroy your ability to think and to be maneuverable within the future, that's when someone can replace you. You know, a new technology comes out there. And there's a presentation we'll talk about next time.
Yeah. Dave Cannon too.
There's technologies that are out there right now that are very cost effective compared to what is available today on a conventional means, even with oil and gas. You know, as you strip away subsidies, there are technologies out there for energy generation that can compete with us today. Those are the things that are in our rearview mirror. If we don't continue to push that technology and stay relevant, that's going to be a chasm jumping moment for those other technologies, and it will replace us. So we need to always continue to push forward.
Man, I loved how you summed that up. And we have several more pages of your presentation to discuss on Dave Cannon 2. Also with the new data that you're willing to share with us, with the kind of evolution of this presentation that you've given us. But to end the podcast for Dave Cannon 1 and setting us up, as we're going to bring in Mike Party, Denise Cox, so the president-elect of the AAPG and the president of the AAPG. And then we're going to probably go with some technical people and then some kind of local juggernauts that have been in the game for a while. So it'll be a mixed bag that's going to come out along with you. But I think you're really setting the tone for what we're after in this podcast, right? Like, there is a massive need for change in a positive way for us to increase the ability to get recovery factors up. I get it. We are producing and developing hydrocarbon way more efficient than ever. I get it. And the slope is very steep. It looks fantastic. But if we can't get greater than 30%, and that's being generous to me, in my opinion, to you, to all the majors that are producing a ton of wells, 30% recovery factors, if we can't increase that, all we can do is just drill more wells. So if engineering and technology, here's how I want to leave the podcast, and the thought for Dave Cannon 2 is if the engineering and technology has got us to this point and we are about to get complacent as an industry, then what is it that's going to drive the change in technology? It's not going to change itself. There has to be something that's going to drive that change, and it is of my personal opinion that it's geology. We are going to discover something about this rock that's going to change the future of our industry, because that is what's been left behind. The engineers and the technology is it right now, but they're lost. And I think we can defend that by your presentation and by what's happening in the industry. Right now, we can increase a little bit, but what's that major increase going to be? I think it's going to be an innovation, an integration of geology to understanding this rock more, and we're going to get something out of the story of this rock.
Agreed.
And on that note, we're signing off.
Let's go. Mr. Cannon, thank you so much, man. We will do this
guys.
again.
This is great.
We're going to take a minute to recognize our sponsors.
Stratigraph has extensively worked the Gulf Coast, all of Texas, the Mid-Continent, and is now serving the Permian Basin from our offices in Odessa. Stratigraph offers a host of geologic services, from logging to steering to geochemistry. Stratigraph has logged over 14,000 wells worldwide, including 750 recent wells in the Permian Basin. Take advantage of Stratigraph's extensive experience, now combined with local service, serving operators large and small, including over 20 different companies in the Permian Basin. When it's time for your geological services, ask for a quote from a multifaceted company with over 57 years of experience. Stratigraph, accurate data, reliable solutions.
UTPB is getting ready for the 3rd annual Geoscience Symposium. The symposium has had terrific success with professionals from the local oil and gas industry coming in to check out the students' research. The symposium this year will include UTPB President Dr. Woodley, Dr. John Rotson, Stanford graduate and president of the Basin Dynamics, as keynote speaker, along with multiple students' oral and poster presentations. Mark your calendars, y'all. It's on April 25th.
Roberts Accounting, providing a low-pressure approach to personal and professional services. They have an excellent client retention rate and are extremely proud of their high-quality services that their firm provides. They strive to help make the final tax returns a foregone conclusion, rather than a pitfall of potential surprises and setbacks. They encourage their clients to stay in constant contact throughout the years to keep them informed of the changes and the events that will influence their tax situation. For more information, please call 818-884-2334 or visit robertsaccounting.com.
Mudrock Studio is located in the heart of the Permian Basin, Midland, Texas. It's a world-class recording studio. Contact Anthony Nieto at 432-557-1055.